Good afternoon, everybody. Bobby Sharma and Yana Epps here with Higher Profits with Bobby Sharma and Yana Epps. Our first podcast together. I'm thrilled to have Yana join me on my new podcast. But today we have a special guest, Justin Pogue. Justin and I were connected through a mutual friend. I just want to read a quick bio of Mr. Justin Pogue, a very, really amazing credentials. He's been a consultant for Fox News, the Mercury News, SF Gate, Realtor.com, Apartment Therapy, and many other publications and channels. But even more impressive is that Justin has a degree in economics from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as an MBA from Darden School at the University of Virginia. And Justin is a San Jose native. He attended Bellarmine Prep School and the Harker School. So Justin, you obviously bring amazing credentials to this discussion. This very timely and important discussion that we're having. You've written a book called Rental Secrets, and we're going to talk about rental secrets in a little bit. But just tell our audience a little bit about your background. Why you got into real estate after getting your MBA and your economics degree. But just share a little story about yourself.
Absolutely, Bobby. I'm really happy to be here. My real estate career actually started by accident. When I was in graduate school, I was planning to become a management consultant. So I had done all the prep for the interviews and I was set. I had my 12-week internship all set up. And then the dot-com bubble burst. And 12 weeks got cut to 6, and that industry basically stopped hiring anyone. In fact, they sent rescission letters to people that they had already hired, basically saying, thank you very much for buying a house near our office. We no longer need your services. So I had to figure out what was going next. And it's a good lesson for people that the world looks one way when you go into school, and it can look completely different when you come out on the other side. So resilience is absolutely key. And my real estate experience really started with my mother. She had been a real estate agent back in the 80s, and it had never really taken off as a career for her, but she kept her interest in real estate. So at that point, she was saying, well, you finished school, you're trying to figure out what you want to do next. Let's just go look at this one property opportunity down in Florida. So we actually took a road trip down to Florida. Wow. And we were looking at properties that were on the lands available list. So these were properties that you could purchase by paying the back taxes on them, and then do some legal work to clear up the title, and then you own the property free and clear. So that's really where my real estate career started. So we got we're able to take control of some pieces of vacant land, flip those to some local developers, and that's where the whole thing got started.
That's where you got the bug.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Love that story, Justin. It's amazing how you were able to adapt in a time of similar to the crisis we're going through right now, where times change drastically, and sometimes your ability to adapt, it could be a blessing in disguise. It opened up a whole new door for you.
Yeah. And times when people are going through transitions like that, it really provides an opportunity to assess what skills you have, what you're capable of doing, what you can bring to the table, and how you might be able to use that in a different way. Exactly. And these times are really kind of few and far between, because otherwise, you're working 80 hours a week, you're running full steam, you're making dinner for the kids, and you're handling all of that stuff, and your mind is not focused inward on what you have to provide to that.
Right.
May really end up changing your life.
Sometimes we need to be knocked off course to find a different path.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And the book that you mentioned, Rental Secrets, when I started writing that at another time in my life when I actually been kind of knocked off course a little bit. So after Florida, my parents and I started a company, and we invested in properties. We actually got up to 72 units that we were managing. And after a certain point, it kind of got to the point where, is self-managing really the best use of my time? Should I be hiring a property management company to do that? And what opportunities am I missing out on by spending my time self-managing? So we actually hired a property management company to take over the properties that we had. And I returned to California and actually took a property management job with a local company managing 200 apartments in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I wanted something, the properties that we had were in the Southeast. So I wanted something a little different. I wanted to be in a bigger market. I wanted to see how a larger corporation managed their properties and get that exposure. And I did get that exposure over that next year. And when I left that company, I was thinking about, well, how can I take my experiences and apply them in a different way? And that's really where my journey to writing Rental Secrets came about. It took me about a year to write the book. And one of the things that sparked my interest is I go into the bookstore and I'm looking at the real estate section. And all the books there were written for owners, managers, and investors. And I'm thinking to myself, there's a really vital group that's being left out of this discussion. And it was the renters, the 43 million households that are bringing $500 billion to the table every year to float the entire industry. And wouldn't the industry work so much better if renters were actually informed and they knew how to navigate the industry and how to work with landlords and really get rid of this animosity that exists between renters and landlords? Because if you've ever watched Judge Judy and you've seen a tenant-landlord dispute episode, it is full of knockdown, drag out, animosity, and friction. And that's really not where we need to be, because renters and landlords are two sides of the same coin. They actually desperately need each other. And so I kind of saw this as an opportunity to smooth out that relationship, because there are no classes for renters on how do I rent, what language are landlords speaking, why are they asking me for certain things, what is the real importance of renters insurance, those kinds of questions. There's no real support educationally on the renter side for any of that. And then also on the landlord side, there's a lot of quote unquote education, but it usually takes the form of seminars or conferences that sing all the praises of real estate, but they don't talk about any of the problems. So they'll talk about the appreciation, they'll talk about how the tax benefits and all of that, but they don't talk about the nuts and bolts of property management. They don't talk about, well, how do you deal with maintenance issues? They just assume that you'll have people to handle that and the money to do so. Maybe you will and maybe you won't, but the seminar people have already gotten their money and they've moved on. So they're not really worried about the aftermath and what that really looks like. But as a smaller landlord, I really have to pay attention to that. And having been a smaller landlord, I've gone through those processes and overcome a lot of things that, quite frankly, I wasn't even thinking about when I started as a landlord. But yeah, so that's kind of how the book came about, and the reason why it's there, and the reason why it's relevant for both renters and landlords.
Yeah, I think it provides a very unique perspective. I mean, it sounds like obviously you have experience as a landlord. You also have a perspective of working for a corporate property management company. You also are writing a book from a renter's perspective and empowering them. So you mentioned a couple points, talking points, but can you talk about a few more things from the book that you are empowering renters with in terms of knowledge in order to build that relationship and strength between their landlords?
Yeah, absolutely. So people wonder, well, how, as a renter, how can I negotiate with landlords? Where does my power in this relationship come from? And it comes from a couple of places, but primarily it is understanding what I call the landlord's predicament, understanding the problems that landlords are having in dealing with what essentially is a small business. It's not presented that way, but essentially when you buy a building, you become a small business. and all of the issues that come along with that. And most real estate investors are not prepared for that. But if we talk about, we can talk about specifically in the book, a few of the things that I talk about is when a property is vacant, the landlord's not getting any money. But it gets worse because they can't recover the money that they didn't get. It's gone forever, which creates this bias towards action. So what I'm telling renters is you're looking for those properties that are vacant, that have been vacant for a month or 2 months. And yes, even in really hot markets, properties do stay vacant for 1 and 2 months for a host of reasons. Sometimes it's not marketed properly. Sometimes the leasing agent doesn't know what they're doing. Sometimes the leasing agent just doesn't know how to present themselves properly, because there's a lot of turnover among leasing agents too.
Yep.
But anyway, from the renter standpoint, you can come in, look for specifically for those properties, and then say the rent is $3,000. If you come in and give them an offer of say $2,900 or even $2,950, they may jump on that because that solves their problem today. And really, when you make that offer, what you're asking them is, do you want to give me a $600 or $1,200 concession, or do you want to face the probability of losing $3,000 over the next month?
Yep.
The choice is yours. I'm here. I'm ready to make a deal and sign on the dotted line right now and take possession right now. Yep. And presenting it in that way and understanding just that one concept puts you in a position to actually save some money on your housing costs. And now that gives you opportunity to save money, down debt, do investments, whatever the renter is trying to do on their side. And at the same time, you're solving the landlord's problem. They're getting cash flow in the door. Because when I talk to landlords, what's most important is not necessarily charging top dollar. What's most important is cash flow continuity. That is what's most important.
Yep.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. It gives them immediate leverage. So I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the current climate. So obviously we are facing an unprecedented crisis in our all over the world. What have you seen in terms of the impact that it's had on the landlord-tenant relationship?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the landlord-tenant relationship wasn't the best relationship prior to this. However, those landlords and tenants who have put some work into their relationship previously are in a much better position to weather this storm much more easily and with much less emotion and drama.
Are you suggesting that if the relationship was stronger previously, that your landlord might be more compassionate or more sensitive to your circumstances?
I'm suggesting that the better the relationship, the better your opportunity to negotiate with the other side.
Absolutely,
and
I agree.
So for example, those tenants who have pets and don't clean up after them, those tenants who make noise after quiet hours have started, those tenants who have proven to be difficult to work with and don't get along with the other residents, I'm less interested in making deals with you. I'm much more interested in using this situation as an opportunity to escort you out so I can get somebody in who will actually help make my community a better place to be. And it's really important. I remember one specific instance when I was managing a 63 unit apartment building in Campbell, California. And 2 of the apartments had been rented by some international students, and they were on the local soccer team at the community college. And they basically started using the community as their private play area. So they would invite all of their friends over on the weekend to fill up the swimming pool. They'd be playing soccer in the courtyard. And all of this is denying use of those amenities to the other residents. And then there also started to be some noise complaints that were going on. Because as the manager, I'm not there 24/7, but the tenants are. So they So they're seeing these things. And how I first found out about it is one of my residents actually sent me an email and he's saying, we need to move out. We need to break my lease. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. You've been here for 7 years. What's going on? What's changed? What's the situation? And then he started opening up about what was going on.
No.
And so in that situation, the tenant that's been there for 7 years, who's been reliable and all of that, that's the tenant that I want to keep. That's the tenant that I want to focus on. And the other tenants, the ones that are disrupting the community, those are the ones that I want to have move on. And ultimately, that is what happened. So in this situation, what we're seeing is some landlords are actually proactively lowering the rent or adjusting the renter's obligations up front by either lowering the rent or deferring payment, and then allowing people to pay over the next 12 months or something like that. Some renters are actually being proactive and reaching out to their landlord saying, look, this is my situation. This is what I can pay this month, and actually making a deal around that. Because the renter may say, well, I know that a number of people are likely not able to pay this month or next month. And I know my rent is $3,000, but if I can pay you $2,750 right now, can that satisfy my rent obligation for this month? And really looking at it from the landlord standpoint, which is you need cash flow now because you've got rent obligations, you may have salary obligations, you have expenses that you need to pay now. And while we've heard news of eviction moratoriums and those kinds of things occurring as far as renters, the conversation about mortgage forbearance is a much slower conversation. So landlords are really feeling like they're caught in this catch-22 where there's going to be no rent coming in, but then I've still got all these obligations on the
right
other
in the
side.
middle.
And it can feel like it's going to be an untenable situation. And of course, the situation is fluid. Lots of things are going on, and there's a lot of conversations that are happening, because just like the landlord's nightmare is all of their tenants get evicted or stop paying rent at once, the bank's nightmare is all of the people who have mortgages with them stop paying at once.
Yeah.
What's been your observation on a macro level? Sorry, Bobby. Your observation in terms of April collections, and what's your forecast on where that's headed?
So April collections are actually looking pretty positive. So the information that I'm getting is that 75% of all renters nationwide went ahead and paid April rent as scheduled, no muss, no fuss. And then there's another 25% that either made partial payments or didn't make any payments. Now, this information is as of about April 5th. So it sounds, on the surface, it sounds kind of negative. But what we have to understand is that even in the normal process of paying rent, there is a good 15 to 19% of renters that actually haven't paid rent by the 5th anyway, regardless. Now, they will ultimately pay it over the course of the remaining month. So you're still you're still in a situation where you're pretty close to what is normally happening. Of course, April is the first month. So people have set aside savings and that kind of thing. So they're able to make that adjustment, make that payment. As this goes on longer into May and June and possibly beyond, those numbers are going to start to be impacted, and it's probably not going to look as rosy going forward.
Got it. And so at this point, Justin, like so I interact with a lot of landlords, and they, have some horror stories about, and I've actually sat down and talked to, several landlords, especially in places like San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley areas, and I think parts of San Jose are extremely tenant friendly. And there's a strong, from a landlord's perspective, there's a strong lobby from both politicians and attorneys to support tenants. Like there's a lot of free legal services. I see signs even before the virus, driving down some streets, and it would say, stop evictions. All these kind of bandit signs. At the same time, there's really no united messaging or for landlords. And I hear about people that had rent control. They're in San Francisco living in a 3-bedroom house, paying $1,000 because they got in 10 years or 15 years ago, and the market rents are 4,000, but they're paying 1,000, which means that the new tenants are actually bearing the burden of paying a higher rent for the subsidized rents. I'm more interested in, like, your mission is very noble, which is how do you create a better communication? How do you create a better relationship between tenants and landlords, because they're interdependent. They're the tenants are landlords' clients, and the landlords are banks' clients. Each party has obligations, and there's this misconception with the word that if you're a landlord, you're somehow wealthy. In many cases, that's not true. We're a lot of us are just trying to make a living and providing housing for people.
Yes.
But what can your book and what can your messaging do to create a better environment for both landlords and tenants to, instead of working against each other, to work together? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually do a live presentation based on my book, and in that presentation, I have 2 pictures that are particularly relevant to this. So one picture is the myth, and the myth is that you as a landlord are lying back on your yacht, sipping umbrella drinks down in the Caribbean.
That's actually Bobby, though. That is Bobby.
And that's the myth for most landlords. That's the myth. The reality is most landlords kind of feel like they're represented by this other picture, which is, you see a picture of the ocean with one hand barely breaking above the surface, looking for a lifeline. And that's where most landlords are, because people forget the real estate industry is extremely fragmented. That 43 million number of rental households that I mentioned before, well, most of those units are owned by individual people, and they may own a single family, or they may own a 4-plex or a 6-plex or a small apartment building. So the majority is not the really large corporations. And even amongst the really large corporations, they are representing state pension plans, teachers, firefighters, policemen, and they're representing people who have 401ks. So
investors.
That money just doesn't appear from anywhere. So a lot of the people that are providing this housing are, in effect, small mom and pop kind of people. And also in this discussion, people forget that housing is an investment choice that someone made. They could have bought stocks, they could have bought bonds, they could have started a business, but instead they chose to build housing. So that's the only way you actually get housing. So this concept of housing as a right, it really doesn't exist. Somebody has to create it for you, or you have to create it for yourself. It just doesn't spring into being. Kind of like the right to free speech, that just springs into being. There's no cost associated with that. It just is. But housing is not that same way. So getting back to your point about having these better conversations, actually understanding where housing comes from, actually going through the process of understanding the process of how housing gets built and the hoops that landlords have to jump through in order to create housing. If renters understood more of what landlords were dealing with in terms of creating housing, then I think this conversation would be in a better place. I think it would also be in a better place if we removed the helplessness and hopelessness that a lot of renters feel whenever they walk into a landlord's office. They feel like they are at the mercy of this other person, because of what's available in the market, because of the costs and all of that. But really, if you understood how the landlord is thinking, the situations that they're dealing with, the problems that they're having, and the impact that you as a renter can have on those problems,
Sure.
then that also paves the way for a much better relationship. And that's where my book, Rental Secrets, is focused on,
Sure.
is getting the renter, is kind of opening the door. I know if you can see the cover back there, we're peeling back,
Yeah.
and giving access to a perspective that most people never see.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in that way, we're kind of educating renters on what landlords are doing, what they're facing, and how renters can help. And by helping, they're also helping themselves as
Makes
well.
sense. Makes
So
sense.
Hey, Justin.
help me help you.
Yep.
Quick question on that. So obviously landlord-tenant laws are different from state to state, and you're based here in California. Does your books talk about specific rent tenant laws for this market, or is it a universal application?
That's a really great question, and I get it a lot. So Rental Secrets is not written from a legal standpoint. It's written from a market standpoint. So the problems and issues and situations that landlords are facing that I talk about in my book, they are faced by all landlords in every market to one degree or another. So it's not geographically focused on California, or really even the US for that matter. If you are renting a space for time, these are the problems that you are going to have, and these are the ways that renters can help you deal with those problems.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I know we're kind of coming up on our time. Justin, what's on your plate? What's your roadmap look like for your book, or what are you involved in right now? And we'd love to get you in front of a bigger audience at some point, but what are you working on right now?
So most recently, I just completed the audiobook version of Rental Secrets that is available as of April 1st. I'm in discussions with Cal State East Bay to actually do a live presentation on campus at some point in the future for both their faculty and students. And I'm actually having a lot of webinar podcast conversations, just like this one, with a number of different people, realtors, insurance agents, people in the financial education space, the financial literacy space, because there's a lot of confusion. Well, there was confusion before the current situation, but there's a lot of confusion out there about how do I navigate this with my landlord right now? What should I be thinking about? How can I come out of this in a better situation possibly? So that's what a lot of those podcasts and webinars that I'm going to be doing over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Actually, I think I've got eight of these types of conversations scheduled already this month, and there possibly will be more.
Very nice. Very nice. Yana,
how would somebody?
Yeah.
How would one locate information on joining those webinars? Where would they find the information? You want to share your website with us?
Yes, absolutely. So rentalsecrets.net is the website that I've created around the book. So it has additional information about my background, as well as some videos that walk through the value of each chapter in the book. On top of that, I've got my past podcast appearances are archived in the media section as well on that website. In addition, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and people can connect with me there. And they can also reach me at justin@rentalsecrets.net.
Very cool.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I think this was spot on, Justin. Very relevant and current topics. Thank you so much for being such a good resource, Bobby.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Thanks, Yana. We've recorded this. We'll post it to our audience, and we hope to have you on another future webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. Thanks
Thank you,
for having
Justin.
me.
Thank you. Thank you, Yana.
Thank you much.
Okay.